welcome everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I also was given feedback after the first session that I should also start with good evening, because that can be relevant depending where folks are joining from, what part of the world. So we today are in for a special treat. So I'm really happy to be spending the next hour with Stephanie Linder and with all of you. So her session today is the end of learning and development as we know it. So as a reminder, if you've not used AirMeet before, feel free to use the chat for our session. So this is our session chat. Welcome all. And then also on the bottom, if you're not familiar with AirMeet, if you see that little smiley face and hover over it, you'll see reactions. So if Stephanie says something that resonates with you, if you have a good idea, if you love something she said, whatever it might be, feel free to use your reactions so we can see what's resonating with folks as we go. I will be monitoring the chat, and we are going to try to save time for questions at the end. So I think that was all of our housekeeping stuff that I needed to do. So with that, I will turn it over to Stephanie, let her introduce herself, and give her as much time as humanly possible to cover this awesome and very, I'm sure, complicated topic.
Thanks, Stephanie. Jessica. So welcome. I see we are fairly people already, and people writing from where they are, from Dallas and Austin, so nice. So I'm talking to Stephanie, and I'm a bit envious that
Stephanie, your audio is breaking up a little bit, Stephanie. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's your headset.
Okay, that's not so good. Tell me if it's still that way.
That's much better.
Much better?
Whatever you just did is much better.
Okay,
so go with that. Whatever you're doing right now, go with that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for telling me. Yes, so good to have that. Everybody. As I already told, I'm a bit envious that you can see me. I can't see that part is the end. And I want to tell you a few things about me in the beginning. So my name is Stephanie Linder. I'm a learning and development consultant. I'm an organization.
Your audio is still being a little finicky, Stephanie. Your audio is still being a little finicky.
Yeah.
Right,
I'll
so
try and.
Only other thing.
Okay. So I'll try and just talk slowly, so it's not making as much of a difference.
So the other thing that you can try, which is a little less engaging, is if you want to try to turn off your video just for bandwidth purposes, and also just a reminder, make sure any other windows you have open, just shut like everything on your computer that you can.
Okay, so then let's try and close the video. I'm sorry. Okay, Jessica,
that's okay.
Tell me if it's getting better.
Yeah, no, you're perfect now. So whatever you're doing now, just keep doing that.
Okay, perfect. So,
perfect.
Yes, let's start again. My name is Stephanie Linder. I'm an organizational development consultant in the financial sector, and I consult and lead all kinds of different transformation projects, especially regarding work, change management, future leadership, future work, all these topics. But I actually have a background in learning and development. So I studied educational sciences and now education, and I've always focused on learning and organization contexts. And as a study consultant, I'm also always been interested in just how organization contexts are changing and how the learning in these contexts are changing. And I think with that we are right in the middle of it, because with COVID-19, obviously our organizations are changing quite fast. So I see people saying that it's still breaking up, and if I can just use the computer speakers outside.
Yeah, but like right now you're really good, but it's been going in and out a little bit. I don't know if it's the headset. Do you just have a speaker on your computer that if you just talk, it would pick you up? Because it worked fine when we were backstage. I heard you completely fine for the 15 minutes we were backstage, so I don't know what's happening.
So sorry. Let's try the computer. You still hear me?
Yeah. Okay, just keep talking. Let's try it.
So if that's
yes.
Tell me if it's better, because I'm not sure. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Someone said when I'm unmuted, they can hear me better. So I guess I'll just keep myself unmuted and be quiet.
Okay, so the problem seems to be that I now can hear you not as well. Speak again.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, you're just using the computer speaker now. Yeah, I think that's better. Just keep trying that.
Okay, perfect. I'll do that. So I'll start again with the COVID-19 situation and how our companies are really changing fast in COVID-19 situation. And obviously that will have an impact on learning in our companies too, learning in our organization. And let's start with a little quiz, you might say. Let's try and guess how has learning, the time spent with learning, changed just from January 2020 to April 2020. So might give you a little tip. The learning actually increased, the time spent learning actually increased, but by how much? Maybe you can just go ahead and put a sentence in the chat. So I think you're still guessing. Take your time and then put a percentage of how learning has changed. The time spent learning. Virtual classes, yes, but I'm actually sorry for not putting it as clearly. I'm looking for a percentage of how much time people spend learning.
How much time people spent learning? What percentage?
70% increase. Yeah. Let's take some other guesses. Don't shy. 30, 25, less than 10, 5 to 6 hours a day. Okay, I'll show you. 75, I do at least 4 hours a day. Okay, I'll go ahead. I'll show you. Let's try it again. Yeah, now it's going. So it actually increased by 130%. The time spent learning for every individual increased by 130%. And the ones of you who might have quite a good side might see that this is actually data from LinkedIn Learning, and they compared their March-April LinkedIn Learning courses to their January-February LinkedIn Learning courses from 2020. So from January to February to March-April, it increased by 130%. That's just the time spent learning on LinkedIn. And obviously, you might have seen that people are on different sites too. They might be on Coursera, they might be on Udemy, they might have their own digital courses in their company. In-person training will probably have gone back, but then even the courses in the company, the digital courses might have gone up. So it probably will have increased even more than 130%. And yet, I'm here and I'm trying to tell you that it's the end of learning and development. So why is it? Why do I think it's the end of learning and development when learning and development clearly increased, even in just this short time? So I do not think that it is because of digitalization. Because I do think these digital courses as learning too, obviously, and I think it's an important part and will be an important part in the future. Also not because of financial learning. Because yes, you could say that with LinkedIn or with Udemy or something like that, there might not be as much money in it, but obviously these companies are making money from it too, and they're part of the learning and development sector, even if they're not in our company. No, it's not because of that. So to understand why I think learning and development is changing in such a drastic way that it might actually be going extinct, you have to understand how I define learning and development. For me, learning and development is every measure that empowers people and organizations to navigate current and future challenges in order to further their objectives. So what are the challenges in our world we live in? Maybe to future tech, what are some challenges in our world? So I see people are still saying pay to each other, and that's fine too. I might just jump ahead and give you like one word which you probably all know, VUCA. You probably all heard of VUCA. In case here are some people who have not heard of VUCA before, I'll just give you a very, very short definition of VUCA. VUCA is an acronym and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So to put it all together, it describes the state our world is in right now, and it describes that in our world, our current world is changing much more faster than before. It's much more complex. We have markets which are very, very much interwoven, and with the internet, obviously, we are connected, and it's not as easy to predict what is happening in the future, in the short-term future, even, than it used to be back like 30, 40, 50, or even 100 years ago, where we could quite safely predict how our future will be changing, at least in the next few. So that's the current state we're working in with VUCA, the world we're living in with VUCA, and that has driving influence on our decision making and how we decide and how we have to work in the organizations. So if we would now be in an in-person setting, or I could give a microphone to you or something like that, I would ask somebody of you to explain the difference between complicated and complex. So obviously I can't do that, so I'll just go ahead and explain the difference. So complicated systems, there's something like airplanes, or a computer is a complicated system. Clockwork is a complicated system. The complicated systems, they're not as easy to understand for laymen, but if you're an expert with the system, you can quite safely understand how everything is working together. And with complicated systems, you might say they're either working or they're not working. They're either working or they're broken. In our world, we are much more faced with complex systems, however. Complex systems are something like our markets or organizations, and or learning in our organizations is complex systems. With complex systems, even if you're an expert, you cannot safely predict how they interact. You cannot safely predict how everything is working together and what will be the next step. And that means with complex systems that you always have to do one step after another. You have to do a step and then steps. You have to do a step and change something and learn something and do something else, and then try how the system is, or see how the system is changing and how the system is evolving in order to understand what your decisions will have to be. So if with complex systems, and that's what we usually face with, we always have to learn something new about the system every step on the way. Why is it then that 2018 Cognizant study showed that up to 50% of employees say that actually they feel that learning doesn't really have any real input or any real value for their day-to-day performance in their job? I would argue it is because of the current state our learning and development system is in. So what do I mean by that? Let's break it down. This is put very, very simple, but usually with learning and development in today's organizations, we look at three things. Firstly, we look at objectives. So that means what are our overall objectives of the organization, and then break it down to learning objectives. So what skills and functions our organization needs. Then, on the other hand side, we look at the individuals in the organization. And we ask which skills do these individuals have, which skills do they lack, and what skills do they need in order to fulfill our objectives. And then, thirdly, we look at the measures. So we ask what learning measures provide the skills and knowledge we need in our organization. Very simple. And there's actually something wrong with every single step of these. So let's go into it. Firstly, let's look at the objective. See, I told you about VUCA before and how our world is changing much more fastly and faster and faster and faster. So if we're trying to predict learning objectives, breaking them down from our overall company objectives and then putting it down in learning objectives, putting it down in courses, and then create content for these courses, that actually takes quite some time. So we're always a step behind. We're always a step behind in our fast changing world. Well, but now you might say, okay, then we are a step behind. The other companies are a step behind also because our world is changing too fast. That's fine. All of us are a step behind, but at least we're developing. But there's actually another problem. Even if we could be fast enough, even if we say, okay, just everybody's a step behind, but fine, then let's take a look if we really can predict learning objectives. Let's come back to VUCA. We cannot safely predict anymore how our systems are developing. We cannot safely predict how our world is changing. So how can we safely predict what learning we need in the future, what skills we need, what knowledge we need? It's really, really hard to say what learning objectives for the future should be in this VUCA world. Let's step ahead to the individual. There's something which is really, really strange to me. So company managers, people in companies, they usually say, oh, we need these individuals who have a growth mindset. We need these individuals who are curious and who really want to learn and who are just interested in learning and always want to learn. And then on the other hand, learning and development would usually look for lack. They would usually look for what is this person lacking and what does this person need to learn. Not realizing that obviously in our VUCA world, there's always something to learn. Having to learn something is not a lack, it's a constant. And to spin it positively, I would actually say that there's not only always something to learn, but we are actually always learning. And yet, our companies are not really taking what we learn. We're constantly learning in all different areas of life, but our companies are just looking for these learning objectives. They're just looking for the lack. And that's why they're not making use of what we are learning all the time. And there's one other thing too. So companies are often talking about becoming a learning organization. Because we live in social systems, we can only make sense of the world in social systems. So becoming a learning organization makes use of our collective learning and not singular learning. But learning and development in the state it is today is usually focused on the individual. We are almost only looking at the individual. And of course, we are putting these individuals in teams and we are putting them in groups to learn from each other, and we are trying to make them exchange inputs and learning opportunities. But it's still looking at the individual in the end. We are not really developing these spaces where we have a collective learning, where we are working on the structures, the cultures, and the strategies of our company in order to develop learning organizations. And lastly, let's look at the measures. So our learning measures would usually have quite an event character. And you might say, oh, that sounds quite nice. Event character, that sounds like fun and making it really interesting and like the Disneyland of learning, and it sounds like learning is just an event. But what I actually mean with event character is that we understand learning as singular learning situations. And you might even say, okay, if we have a learning program, then it's a consecutive line of different singular learning situations. And they might even be connected. But we still understand it as something that has a start and that has a finish. And we might, if we do that, look at this learning event, something like a training, for example. Maybe we look at a bit of a time beforehand, and then maybe we even look at a bit of a time after that. But we might not even be doing that. That's still something we will at the beginning and with the end. However, learning science actually shows that learning is much more of a nonlinear process. Let me give you an example for that. For example, have you ever come back from a training and you really enjoyed the training and you have that really detailed plan of how you're trying to make use of what you've learned and you're going to integrate it in your day-to-day life, and then you meet your boss. And they tell you that they've been to their training before too, and they really didn't enjoy it, and it didn't help them at all. And suddenly, you're a bit demotivated, and in the days to come, you realize that you're not really putting use to what you learned. Yeah, that's one example. Let me give you another example. Have you ever learned a theory 3 or 4 times and you just did not understand it? You couldn't get it. And then you're talking to a colleague of yours and they tell you something which is seemingly quite unrelated. But suddenly, it just clicks. And you suddenly understand that theory without even knowing what it was that the colleague said, what made you understand it. So these two examples are 2 examples to show you 2 things. Firstly, there's no real end and beginning to learning. Learning is much more of a continuous process that keeps on going and going and going, even after a specific learning situation. And the second thing is that, of course, our world is moving in a linear fashion. Our time is moving in a linear fashion. We cannot turn back time. But still, learning is more of a non-linear process because something somebody says after a learning situation can even change the learning we did retrospectively. So it can actually change what we learned before. So we have to understand learning as a non-linear process. Okay, so we looked at the objectives, we looked at the individuals, and we looked at the measures. That is actually a 4th thing which we do in learning and development, and that's that we try and link them all together. So we ask, what measures, or how do we have to design our measures, how do we have to design our learning opportunities in order for the individuals to be able to learn and to put it to use, in order to then fulfill the objectives. So we're trying to all link it together. And what we would usually do for that is that we would look at our learning event and we would try and design very, very good. We would try and make it perfect. So that might be that we try and make use of brain studies and we try and make it very brain friendly, or we might use learning matches or something like that, or we might even go into breaking it down into small learning sessions. The other thing we do is that we might say that we have to do and make the learning situation very, very similar to the situations that people work in order for them to be able to integrate it in their workspace. Well, with both, we are looking at the situation and making it perfect. In 2018, I wrote my master's thesis on learning transfer in social networks, and I was aiming to make a learning transfer model. So I'm looking for all these factors that influence learning. And I actually found quite a lot of factors, but what I found was even more interesting than all these different factors was that one very interesting fact was they're all interdependent. They're working together. You cannot just add them up. If you put in 3 factors, that might be even worse if you only put in 2 factors. And let's, for example, come back to the example with the boss. So we came home from a training, we really liked the training, we wanted to put it to use, our boss said it didn't help them, and we were demotivated. So what if we had quite a bad relationship with our boss and we thought they were incompetent? Then we might be even more motivated to put it to use because we think our boss said it's not worth it anyways. Or to put it even simpler, maybe we haven't had a coffee this morning and we are just very out of our mind and we don't like it, so we're grumpy, and so we think that what we're learning isn't interested anyways. So you might ask your question, is this talk boring or am I just tired? Is this talk interesting or do I just like the person? You see, these factors all work together. Actually, they work together in such an interdependent way that we as learning and development experts, we are not able to safely predict how we can influence learning. And if we understand that, firstly, we cannot really tell what people need to learn, and secondly, we cannot really safely tell how people need to learn. What does it mean for learning and development as a profession? Well, I think learning and development needs to change. And I think 3 things are important for that. But before I go into these 3 things, I think you might be still stuck on something. I, as a learning and development expert, will be stuck on something. So we all spend a lot of time trying to learn how we can make learning more valuable, trying to find the factors, how we can influence learning. And I now make it sound like it's just all random. And let me make that very clear. I do not think it's all random. I do think there are factors which influence learning, and I do think some factors help more than others, and you can take a look into how we can really influence learning. But I want you to understand that it's not a given. So these factors might probably work better than others, but we cannot safely predict. What we do when we think we can safely predict is that we try and do these perfect trainings. We're trying to go even deeper and deeper and deeper and make it so brain friendly and so modern and put all of our new knowledge into it to have the best factors to best influence it. But we cannot safely influence it. So my thing I want to give to you is maybe try and make it more agile. Maybe try and put some inspection and adaptation in it. Make it not perfect on purpose in order so that you can go step by step. And you have these building blocks and you always accommodate for inspection and adaptation. I think that's one important thing for learning and development of the future. A second thing is that we are social people and we have all these social networks around us and we learn in them and we are just not making use of it. So we are always or oftentimes talking about lifelong learning, which is of course important, but I think it would be much more helpful to take a look at life-wide learning. And with that, I don't mean that we have to learn every single second of our life. We don't have to take the 5 minutes we have to breathe just to learn something new. We don't have to learn every single situation, but we do learn a lot. And we are oftentimes not using that for all different areas of life. and companies are not using it. So as learning and development experts, why not take a look at the person and 300 degrees and what they know from different areas of life too? Why just look at it and look at a person as what they do in their work life? So I think we have to integrate learning from all different areas of life. And the third thing is that I think learning and development needs to be more self-organized. So with the VUCA world, we as learning and development experts will always be one step behind. We cannot be fast enough to find these objectives and find ways to help learners. So learners have to find ways to help themselves. They have to find ways to self-organize their learning. And they will be learning experts in the future. They will be experts for their learning process. So with that, I'm going to pose the question again. Is this the end of learning and development? Maybe vote in the chat if you want to, or give a thumbs up if you think yes. Well, yes, it's the end of learning and development, because in a world of self-organized learning, there's just no room for learning professionals. Everyone is a learning professional. But to be truthfully, I actually do not think it's the end of learning and development. I do think, however, that learning and development will develop to play a more strategic role. And what I mean by that is this. So I think learning and development needs to merge with organizational development. We have to change from taking this look at the individuals and taking a look at the organizations. So we have to find ways to build learning organizations. We have to find ways to build these psychological safe spaces where people can be curious, where people can make mistakes, where people can continuously learn. But I also do think we need a gateway into that, and we need a gateway into self-organized learning. Because when I look at our schools, and I can obviously tell you a lot about the German school system, but I think it's not as different around the world. Schools usually do not focus on self-organized learning. So when our pupils come out of school and they join the workforce, they're not prepared to self-organize learn. So there needs to be somebody to tell them, to teach them, to make them able to self-organize learn, and that will be a future role of learning and development. But it's not only about the kids, not only about the pupils and the young people. It's also about the people who are already in the organization. One thing I see time and time again, that the current learning and development, the typical learning and development sector has much more value than the new learning and development sector, we would say. For example, with Working Out Loud, which is an open framework, and you can just use it, it's free, and you don't have to have as much knowledge. It's quite detailedly put down. You can just use it if you want to. Companies would usually not find it as interesting. They would usually not put as much value into it until there comes like a consultant and they give speeches or keynotes on Working Out Loud, and they do workshops on Working Out Loud and trainings, and they help to integrate it, and obviously they take money for it, and then it suddenly has some value. So we can take and use that for ourselves and use our training that already exists for helping people to step-by-step develop self-organized learning. A third future role of learning and development will be future roles, new roles. I, for example, can see something like a people connector, or an impulse giver, or a continuous learning coach, something like that. Maybe you can even find more roles. But maybe go ahead and put it in the chat if you see some other roles too. And then the fourth thing will start really starting to change, because who better than to start a change than the people who are experts at learning. The people who really value learning and who know that they want to develop it for the future. So who better to start a change than us, basically. And because I think we should start the change, one thing I want to do with you is to find ways to do that. And I do not want to look at ways of how to make this huge organizational change, build an organizational learning organization, because I think that's not something we can start tomorrow. I would much rather look at things we can start tomorrow. And I have brought some things which I think we can actually start tomorrow, but I've talked too much about the collective mind and about how our collective learning is worth more than our singular learning to not ask you. So I would really love for you to take a second, think about how we can all start a change of the future role of learning and development, and put it down in the comments. And let's see if we can find nice ways on how to start this change. And I'll try and shut up for a minute, and you can write down. And obviously it's hard to take the silence, but I'll still want to give you a few more minutes to think about it. Okay. I do not know if it's something with my chat, because before it was a bit of a time switch in the chat and I cannot see something you wrote. Now, either it's my chat or you do not have an idea yet, which is fine because I've just presented it to you. So maybe it's a bit much asked to have an idea yet. So I'll just go ahead and present some of my ideas, and obviously if that gives you some insight, or if you have an idea about it, then just go ahead and still put it in the chat. So some ideas of mine. Let's switch. One idea I think we can already start tomorrow is establishing learning communities. Something like a working out loud system, something like a community of practice or a meetup, in order to foster our social learning, in order to give possibilities for continuous learning. Then a second thing we can do as an individual is to help find trusted communities and mentors. Because probably we as learning and development experts, we will already be in some kind of learning community. And also see this conference as some kind of learning community. But we cannot assume that people always know what their learning communities be or is, and they always have learning communities. So why not try and help them find learning communities? And maybe you can also go and be a mentor if you want to do that. Oh, I see somebody is answering, finding ways to continue to engage learners through collaboration and shared learning opportunities instead of the isolated courses. Easier said than done. Yeah, I like this. Yes. And maybe it is easier said than done, but maybe something like these communities, and maybe the communities we are in together today can help us find ways to do this continuous learning possibilities. Thanks, Erica. Okay, one other thing we can at least start tomorrow, even if we are probably not going to achieve tomorrow, is to convince management. Because probably they're not yet as convinced that learning and development really has to change drastically. And there we have to step in. And we have to give reasons, and we have to explain what is happening in the world and how that relates to learning. And maybe we can even give numbers or just explain why the change will be valuable. Another thing will be to help integrating learning reflection. So I've told you so much about the importance of inspection and reduction. And we can foster it by, for example, giving people the possibility to inspect and adapt and help them with it. By, for example, reflecting questions. Maybe we can give them like a questionnaire to answer every month if they want to. We can do something like an email challenge. Why not give 30 days of one reflecting question a day? Something like, what have you learned last week which you really value? Or when was the last time you really struggled with learning something, and why do you think it was that way? Something like that. Or we can help them with the action plan. We can help them with how are you trying to integrate what you're learning? How could you use it in maybe another area? That's something we could do. And then obviously the last thing, which is quite obvious, probably be a role model for self-organized learning. So we obviously as learning and development consultants have to be the role models for self-organized learning. And with that, I do not only mean that we should self-organize learn, but also show how we're doing it. Tell people what communities we use. Tell people what makes us curious. Tell people how we organize ourselves. That's something I think we can all start tomorrow together. Thank you very much for listening to me. And I think we still have some time for questions, if you have any questions. So if you have questions, just put it down in the chat. Or if you want to, you can also put like a comment or something that comes to mind.
Yes, we definitely have time.
I wrote that she liked the idea of the email. Hey, Jessica, welcome back.
Yeah, so we definitely have time for questions. That last what you were talking about, making the case for leadership for the change. I was like, how do you make the case for leadership for L&D resources? Period. can be a challenge. So we have a good comment from Erica. Finding ways to continue to engage learners through collaboration and shared learning opportunities instead of isolated courses. It's easier said than done. She likes the idea of emailing challenges, polls, or creating quick activities or gamification to foster and support a learning community.
Yes, I also like the gamification thing about it. Yes.
Yeah, no, the notion of taking this space and trying to do things very differently resonates. At my company, we changed to a new learning management system a few months ago, and courtesy of Adobe taking away the whole Flash player situation coincided with that timing. So many of our courses don't work the way that they should in our new LMS. So I have about 30 to 40 courses that I haven't uploaded yet because I'm trying to fix and redo them. We changed to the new LMS maybe 4 months ago, and I've gotten 0 questions about where the missing, just call it 40 courses are. Not one person's missing them, not one person's looking for them in our LMS.
That's interesting.
So I kept feeling this pressure of people are going to be emailing me and they're not going to be ready and I'm not going to be able to, nobody's missing them. Not one person in a company of over 600.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
All right, so what questions, feel free to use the chat if y'all have questions, anything you'd like to ask Stephanie, because we do have some time, because she just breezed right through that. It will give folks a moment to percolate. So Stephanie, in your experience, because it seems like you have, experience working in the role, inside organizations, working as a consultant, if we're internal in an organization, how do you even go about broaching these conversations, right? Because so often they're quick, organizations are quick to listen to the consultants, but it's harder to kind of be a disruptor, a change maker, from inside the house, if you will.
That's right, very much so. Two things. First of all, I feel that HR departments and learning and development departments oftentimes do not have the best stance in the organization. They're usually not involved with board meetings and with strategic decisions, and obviously that needs to change. But that is something to achieve in the longer term. And we, as single learning and development consultants, or as learning and development within an organization, we can always take our thoughts and take other people to present them, something like that. For example, find people and consultants who say just the same new thing, and then you might present it to the management. Oh, that's a new great idea. This person says something and they're really an expert on it, and actually they just prove our point, but we try and make it from externally.
Yeah, absolutely. Along those same lines, in your experience, there's some parts of L&D where it's really easy to see the business impact and feel the business measure, through metrics and different ways that we can evaluate. Some parts of L&D, it's a little tougher to, have those hard metrics and measurements. So, when we're going and either asking someone to be our champion or going to, bat, internally within our organizations ourselves, or even if you're coming in as the external consultant, like, how do we, this is like the age-old question, how do you even make the case for L&D being a priority within the organization and, any semblance in any way, shape, or form? Because that's a piece of this as well, a big piece.
Yeah. So I think explaining how our world is changing and how fast it's changing, you really have to show them that it's important that people constantly learn, because otherwise companies will be behind. And then you can show examples of companies who do constantly learn, who are well known for their learning culture and how they thrive and how it helps them to not only develop their company, to innovate, but also how they have more employee engagement, which is a more important part in today's work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just thinking, I'm just percolating. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know so many folks, when once you really get into the workforce and the work world, as L&D practitioners, there's always, and this is just like your personal viewpoint, your opinion, just based on your background. So you went the route of getting a full master's degree, it looks like. But that's not necessarily always the right journey for the individual practitioners. But I'm thinking about this sort of transitionally, right? Like the more education or credentials, sometimes that can lead to folks, taking you more seriously or thinking that your opinion might be more valid when you're trying to make change or advocate for resources or whatever it may be internally. So for anyone listening in, how do you think additional formal education as a practitioner in the L&D field, how do you think that's really, helped you in your career? Like, why did you make that decision? How did it help you? If you want to talk a little bit about that.
So personally, I think it helped me because it made it possible for me to develop my stance. I became very, very confident with what I think about learning, what I think is important, and how I think it should be developed. But I do not think, obviously, you have to have a master's degree for that. It just helped me. I think in addition to doing something like a master's degree, you can also gain experience in something like this, for example, obviously. But also other networks, or there are also student groups where you can do projects, and just young expert networks where you can develop and also do projects. And that obviously helps with developing yourself, but also with developing good engines.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And then in your professional or personal, your humble opinion, because I see so much value in formal education, but for a variety of reasons that might not be the right decision or the best journey or financially feasible for some folks. So for those that might not be an option to go for that master's or advanced degree, how do you make sure that we continue to learning and staying skilled up and aware of all the different trends and things happening in the world, so we're competitive and really staying relevant in the marketplace?
Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing where learning communities and networks really come into play too, because with that you stay curious and you always get input. And for some people it might be even too much input. So in addition to staying curious, I think we also have to teach people how to organize themselves and help them organize themselves and find what of that information is really relevant to them, how they want to make use of it. So I think it is about serendipity learning, but it's also about structured learning.
I love the shout out to learning community and networking communities, because that's a good synergy between GLDC and L&D Care. So I think that's a great note and a great place to pause on. So just a reminder, if anybody has questions, feel free to use them in the chat. So we will give folks just a moment. If you have no questions, or we've answered all your thoughtful questions, then we can always end a few minutes early and give folks a minute or two before we transition to the next session. I'm looking at the schedule. So on the other track, there is, it would help if I'm on the right day. It would help if I'm looking on the correct day. That would be my problem. So now we're going to have a break, and then there will be 2 sessions that come back at 12:25. So on this track, we have Larissa moderating for Shira Van Straten, and the session is From Voicing the Crowd to Strategic Partner, the road to being an influencing voice in the hiring process. And then on the other stage, we will have Rita hosting Martina, and the topic is the 7 types of rest that every person needs. So with that, we'll give you guys an extra few minutes of wellness. Stretch your legs, go grab a drink, grab a snack. Thank you all for joining and engaging. Hope you have some good takeaways, and a really big thank you to Stephanie for spending time with us today. This was a really, really interesting topic. So thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the questions, Jessica.
All right, of course.
And thanks everyone for listening.
All right, thanks everyone.